And the main thing we needed to pay attention to was the ladder fuels. Planting has been removed from the edges of the house so that it does not touch the house. It was an incredible service from the Fire Safe Council to come out and spend a couple of hours going through this property.
So the ready phase is when there's no immediate threat to you and your family. This is the time when you should be doing education and planning, whether that be training, educating yourself, or accumulating equipment, hardening your home, creating defensible space.
Defensible space is really all about creating a buffer zone between your house and flammable vegetation. We really focus on defensible space around the home, that first 100 feet, but also around the roadway too. Another aspect of the ready phase is hardening the home, and really what that means is making your home more resilient to wildfire.
That's going to be putting the fine-grained mesh around the vents of your home so that embers won't get under your house or into the eaves of your house. That's going to be using non-combustible materials on your deck and around your home. So when an ember storm comes through, it's not going to ignite your home itself.
I currently live here in Grass Valley with my parents. All of us have sleep apnea, so we all have CPAP machines that require power in order to run.
I also use a nebulizer, and that's used to disperse medication that I need to get myself breathing again. When we have safety shutoffs, we have to hook up our equipment to batteries that have inverters.
We have a generator that powers some of the things around the house, but then I obtained a pretty substantial battery from Freed, and it was so easy to go through the process to obtain a battery that I would recommend it to anyone who might have medical needs that require power, or really anything. I would highly recommend contacting Freed.
So whether it's a snowstorm or a public safety power shutoff, we really want folks to be thinking about, okay, what are the things I'll need on hand to weather the storm? Do I need to have candles? Do I need to have battery-powered radio? Do I need to have flashlights? So what are the things that you'll need to shelter in place or address the disaster at hand?
So a go bag could be anything. It could be a backpack, it could be a suitcase. It's going to be something that you put together to sustain yourself, your family, your pets if needed. That's going to have food, water, medication, clothing, toiletries to get you by for 72 hours. You need to think of your go bag as the only resource you may have. Stores may be closed, the power may be out, so you may have to literally live out of this thing for a 3-day period as an evacuee.
If you are someone with a disability, maybe you have a chronic health condition. For me, I have type 1 diabetes, I have an insulin pump, right? And so that's a critical piece that I need to plan for if I'm gonna ever evacuate or be away from my house, frankly, for any amount of time, right? What we find often is that if people don't evacuate with their CPAP machine, with their oxygen concentrator, with their wheelchair, walker, then it can be difficult on the other end.
My name is Ulysses Palencia. I work in the 211 call center. I'm just a resident of Grass Valley. I have 2 daughters, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. In Nevada County, 211 is available 24/7. So what we provide for the community is information. That could be anything from directions to the resource centers. It can be letting them know where the fire is, you know, if they are themselves in an evacuation center, if it's a fire, if there's any information as to whether their power's coming back on during a PSPS. 211 gets the information that we provide directly from the county, so directly from the Office of Emergency Services. The whole team cares. We're all local community members. We all just want to help.
So we were all sleeping in bed on Thursday, November 8th in Paradise. And first the house phone rang, picked up my phone. It was my sister who lived a block or so away from us.
We were woken by a telephone call from my daughter. She said that we were being evacuated.
I left sooner than them. I had everything ready. They were on the way out the door.
There was not time to think about what you're going to take, what you're not going to take.
The night before the fire, I knew it was a red flag warning, and I knew that it was a high risk. So on my way home, I filled up the tank.
On our way out, we didn't get too far from the house, and we're watching fire coming down the hill.
There was a machine shop right to my right there, and it had gas tanks and propane tanks. And I saw a lone ember kind of floating through, dancing through the air. And I
Calling our special meeting to order. Michael, you want to lead us in a pledge? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any corrections or deletions to the agenda?
There are no corrections or deletions, Chair.
Thanks. Okay. So because this is a special meeting discussing capital project financing, we will not be holding general public comment for items not on the agenda. Public comment will be taken for the item being considered at this time. The over-the-phone option for live public comment will be unavailable for today's special meeting as well. Okay, so we're going to go straight into our presentation. And Erin, you want to introduce your guest and get us started?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Hall. Erin Mettler, your Deputy County Executive Officer and Chief Fiscal Officer. With me today is Bobby Chung from K&N Public Finance. He's a consultant that's been with the county for many years and is very well versed on all things municipal financing. We have a brief agenda for you today. We're going to go over a summary of capital facilities projects. Bobby's going to give you a municipal financing 101 session. This is intended to be interactive with questions and answers so that you fully understand the concept of municipal financing. This was a request from your January board workshop to better understand the opportunity and also the risks associated with issuing debt for capital projects. So our intention today is to be educational and also answer some questions that you might have. We'll go through a project readiness recap, looking through the projects that you saw in January and giving you kind of a status update, as well as looking forward to our county's financial status heading into fiscal 25-26 budgeting. And then we'll bring it back for a board discussion relative to our next steps forward. I do have some recommendations for you, and I'm happy to receive direction from your board today. With that, you might recognize this slide from January. This is our 5-year capital project outlook, and we've broken it up into 3 categories: deferred maintenance, department requests, and then ADA, safety, and electric vehicle transition. This list is generic in general, but there are lots of details behind each of these numbers. It's also considered a living list, right? Projects roll on, the numbers change, projects roll off as they get completed or as they become infeasible. And so really this is intended to capture kind of the breadth and magnitude of the 5-year capital project outlook that your facilities team is constantly working on with departments and myself. So it gives you an idea of the magnitude that we could have in front of us if only we had all of the money in the world. So the intention of this, again, is to show you that we have some deferred maintenance projects. This includes roof repair. This includes pavement, sealing of the parking lot of this building, but also upgrades to the jail facility that needs some maintenance, as well as department requests, which could include new buildings, such as an animal shelter, could include new behavioral health buildings or facilities, and things that address kind of staff spacing requirements. As we grow the organization, we run out of office space, and so to have major upgrades like that do require time and money. And then finally, ADA safety and I was going to say emergency, but no, it's electric vehicle transition. Those are kind of a different category. Some of those are mandated. Some of them are planned out over a several-year time period according to a plan. And so separating those out makes some sense here. Again, a typical capital project timeline, we recognize that it takes an average of 5 years from concept to completion for capital projects. And there's a lot of reasons behind that timeline. It can shrink and it can extend, and it really comes back to the risk tolerance of the government, of the county. How much are you willing to risk going forward with a construction project that maybe isn't fully designed or engineered or permitted, but you want to do a design build perhaps? There's some additional risk associated with scope changes, with unexpected construction issues that come up midstream that require more money. And so there's just that kind of decision point available for risk tolerance. Cost of materials is also another one that kind of changes the focus over that time frame. But also funding. As stewards of public funds, we want to make sure that we're maximizing and leveraging our local dollars as much as possible. And so a lot of grant opportunities, which would be a leveraged fund, require that plans, engineering, designs, permitting, that level of readiness a lot of times is required in order to be competitive for grant funding. And also grants are cyclical. And so while we may spend 3 months designing a shelter, for example, for animals, we might have a grant opportunity that we realize is available if only we were ready in time for that grant deadline. And so sometimes that cyclical nature of grants requires us to wait and pause for a number of months before we're able to apply. Also with grant funding, what we found is even though you're shovel ready and the grant requires you to be shovel ready, sometimes our definition of shovel ready and the grantors is very different. And so sometimes we can receive an award letter, which is great. We're all excited. We're going forward. We're accepting the grant. And the time it takes for that agreement to make it back to us is sometimes several months. And this happened recently with a bunch of projects that were state funded where we applied for the funds, received the award, and then sat for 6 months waiting for that grant agreement before we can move forward to go bid for construction. So there are delays that are kind of built into this time frame that both cause it to extend out, but also provide an opportunity to not use 100% local dollars in the project. Again, large projects also can have complex funding with multiple players, multiple sources, and some of those sources have specific requirements of what you can use them on. So, for example, some grants could be specific to infrastructure. So they're used for site preparation, or they're used to extend sewer lines or water lines, but can't be used to actually construct the building. Some grant opportunities are exactly the opposite, where they can be used for furnishings, fixtures, and equipment, so the internal stuff to make the building operational, but can't be used for the capital structure itself. So those nuances are what staff spend a lot of time analyzing in the grant opportunities that come before us and figuring out upwards of 6 different funding sources for one project is possible, depending on the magnitude that we're looking at. So those complexities do add time, and they do require staff to be, paying attention and also be quite creative when it comes to applications and those bid documents that we go out for construction. We do start to stack this readiness alongside each other, and when it comes to financing, we're looking at a timeline of somewhere after design is mostly complete, before we're executing a contract, before we're going out to bid. We're wanting to make sure that our financing timeline hits that sweet spot. And in cases where we're stacking projects into one financing plan, we're going to want to make sure that our timelines are in alignment. So again, looking forward to some synergy here, and also being mindful that once you issue debt financing, there's a time frame in which you have to spend it. So being cognizant of that and project readiness is important. With that, I'm going to introduce Bobby and let him tell you all things municipal finance. And again, if you have questions along the way, feel free to let Bobby know, and he and I are available for that.
Thank you, Erin, for that introduction. Good afternoon, Chair Hall, members of the board. My name is Bobby Chung. I'm with KNN Public Finance, and I am very happy to be here today to chat a little bit about public finance, Bonds 101. Should you, want to pursue debt financing at some point in the future, it's always helpful to have, like a basic kind of understanding of the process and some of the factors that go into debt financing. So as Aaron said, please feel free to stop me at any time. I've got about 30 slides here, and I'm just going to run through. But again,
Could you just be sure to speak right into the mic or bring it a little closer maybe?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, this is the brief agenda. So we'll hit a brief introduction about municipal bonds, talk about some of the key players, talk about the actual methodology for pricing municipal bonds, talk about, once you borrow money, your obligation does not just simply go away. There's some maintenance to your debt program, which your staff is very familiar with already. We'll talk a little bit about your, the county's outstanding debt profile, and then wrap up with a very brief market update. So very briefly, just who I am and my role here. We are, KNN is a municipal advisor. We've served as your advisor for the past decade or so. I've been in the industry since 2001, and I work mostly with California counties. So we work with 35 counties in California. And really, our role is interesting. We're not a broker-dealer. We are really meant to be sitting on your side of the table when you go through the process of evaluating whether or not to borrow money, and if you decide to make that step, to do so in the most prudent and efficient way. So, we're fully registered with the SEC and Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to put your interests ahead of our own. So we're really on your side of the table. Okay, introduction to municipal bonds. What is a municipal bond, and why would you ever want to borrow money? A municipal bond is really a form of a loan, right? I always like to draw comparisons, in our private lives. If I were to buy a house, I could either, pay cash for the house if I was that lucky and had that amount of money, or if I did not, I could go to a bank or a lender and borrow money and pay off that loan over time. And really, that's what a municipal bond is. It's a loan to help accelerate and deliver projects where in instances where you may not have or may not want to use the cash that you have. The intent here is to, spread the cost of repaying the loan over the useful life of the facility, and sometimes you may even be able to achieve some cost savings if let's say it'll take you 5 to 10 years to save enough cash. The cost of construction inflation over that same amount of time may make it so that it would be more efficient for you to borrow in order to deliver that project. The county has utilized bond financing in the fairly recent past. Your most recent 2019 lease revenue bonds were used to finance the county's operations center. That's capital. Long-term capital is one of the key purposes for municipal bond financing. Other forms of infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, bridges, utilities, that type of really projects meant for public use and benefit. Bonds could be issued to refinance your existing debt if the interest rates are lower than when you initially borrowed the money. There are opportunities to refinance your loan at lower interest rates and have some cost savings there. And some borrowers do short-term cash flow borrowings to help bridge just the uncertainty and timing issues, especially with counties where your main revenue source comes in, twice a year, primarily with property taxes. Okay. One key aspect about local government's ability to borrow money that differs from private companies is your ability to borrow money on a tax-exempt basis. So basically, the investors who loan you their money do not pay income tax on the interest that they earn. And therefore, they're able to, and they're willing to loan you money at a rate that is less than a rate that, let's say, like a Microsoft or a GE would be able to borrow money at. They have to access the taxable corporate bond market. You access the tax-exempt bond market. And because you're able to do so, our dear friends at the IRS have certain number of restrictions in order to make it such that you're not borrowing too much. So first of all, your borrowing must be for private use, must be for public use, no private use. And you have to have the reasonable expectation that you will spend the bond money in 3 years. So that helps us when we're working with you and staff, think about what projects may be grouped in certain bond issuances, really depending upon the timing of the expected expenditures. Your bond funds cannot earn arbitrage, so you can't go, borrow money at like 3%, reinvest it at 6%, and then keep that difference for 20 years. That's a no-no. There's certain certifications that you as an issuer make at the time of financing in order to help assure that all of these rules are kept over time. Okay, so this next slide is a summary of some of the common financing tools that public agencies utilize. The first item, general obligation bond. A lot of your school districts are able to pass GO bonds that require 2/3 voter approval for various school facilities and such. Not so common with California counties, right? There have only been a handful of counties in California that have been able to muster the public support for GO bond measures. Alameda County, Santa Clara County, and I think Calaveras County has a GO bond measure outstanding, but that's really about it. Much more common is the lease revenue bond or certificates of participation, which is really the tool that counties, cities utilize to finance capital. That does not require voter approval, and really it's a general fund backed obligation. So it's not explicitly property tax backed like GO bonds are. And then there are other financing options like enterprise revenue bonds. For instance, if the county's solid waste system wanted to borrow money for a new transfer station, like we were looking at for you a couple years ago, you could kind of draw a box around those dollars and specifically pledge the revenues associated with the enterprise towards the repayment of those borrowings. And that also is not voter approved. And finally, community facilities districts and assessment district bonds. Oftentimes, owners in a specific subset, usually a development, could vote to tax themselves for various infrastructure like roads, sewer pipes, that type of infrastructure. But I'm going to concentrate and spend a little bit more time on lease revenue bonds, just because, again, that is the most common tool that counties utilize for capital. The county, Nevada County, actually issued lease revenue bonds 6 years ago in 2019 to finance your operations center. Lease revenue bonds do not require a vote of the people because they are really viewed as contingent obligations. So your board makes lease payments towards the repayment of these bonds so long as you have use and occupancy of a pledged asset. So this admin center was actually initially pledged to this transaction. And the idea is, since you have use and occupancy of this facility, you can lease this facility to a JPA nonprofit corporation and then make lease payments to that authority that gets assigned over to bondholders. So it's a legal structure that allows you to make lease payments towards the repayment of municipal bonds. There are a couple of key points here. You need a county asset in order to do so. You could either use the facility that you will be constructing as the leased asset, But because you cannot make payments until you have use and occupancy of the asset, it is much more efficient and lower cost for you to identify an existing facility, pledge that asset at least during the construction phase of your new project, and then you could swap in the asset that you were actually constructing and then tie that to the bonds that are being paid off to finance that same facility. So your 2019 bonds here, the blue is the principal payments, the orange is the interest, and much like a home loan, in the early years, you're paying more interest than principal, but as you kind of tick through time, on the back end, you're paying off more principal than interest. And this was structured to have a level fiscal year payment over the repayment term of 20 years. Let me pause there, see if there are any comments or questions to what I've covered so far. Okay. Next part, key players, primary legal documents, and credit ratings. This next slide, when and if you decide to go through the public financing process, there are a couple of different parties that you, the county, engage to help go through that process. So obviously, you, the issuer, is a core part of the financing process. Your board actually approves a financing resolution and forms of the financing documents and disclosure, and your staff, multiple offices are typically involved in the process. KNN, as your municipal advisor, would be like playing the role of the quarterback for the financing, kind of keeping folks on track, on task, making sure we often, like negotiate fees with the other parties, and again, really watching out for your best interests throughout the entire process. You would want to hire outside counsel, bond counsel, disclosure counsel, to provide various legal opinions that the investors rely upon when contemplating purchasing your bonds or not. Basically, they give a validity opinion, making sure, kind of providing their stamp of approval that the bond transaction is legally structured, and they give a tax opinion that the investors rely upon that says, yes, these bonds are indeed tax exempt. There usually is a broker-dealer firm, underwriter involved, and they serve as the middleman between you and the actual lender to facilitate the flow of the money. The trustee paying agent is typically a commercial bank that helps enforce the contract that's established by the bonds. And the rating agencies, of course, assign a credit rating that helps assess the creditworthiness of the county. This next slide is a sample timeline, kind of from start to finish, of the public bond issuance process. So really, it's like anywhere, I would say, between a 3 to 6 month process. Most of the time, the process takes 4 to 5 months from start to finish. And that really starts, when we work with staff leading up into the formal kickoff of the transaction to really identify that there's a need that needs to be addressed with the financing. And then we usually spend the first couple of months developing the plan of finance, developing the disclosure document, going to the credit rating agencies, and then all of that, the financing package would come back to your board for formal approval through a financing resolution where you give your stamp of approval to staff and delegate to them the power to finish the transaction. And really, only towards the end of that process, towards the tail end, are we actually setting the interest rates where we price the bonds and then close the bonds 2 weeks later, which is when the money is actually delivered to the county. Okay. There are a couple of different ways to actually sell bonds. There's a competitive method of sale, a negotiated method of sale, and a direct purchase method of sale. And I'll go into each one of these 3 different ways a little bit later in the presentation. But depending upon which method is decided upon, there's a whole suite of documents, legal documents, disclosure documents that, again, would come before your board for approval. We work with staff, bond counsel, county counsel, up to that point to make sure that the transaction is in a form that we think, is both saleable and, reflects all of our recommendations. Okay. Credit ratings. Much like in our private lives, when we need to borrow money, we have a credit score that we look at, right? The higher our credit score, the lower the cost of borrowing, and the lower the credit score, the higher the cost of our borrowing. And that's the same thing with public agencies, right? The higher your credit score, the lower interest cost you will be able to secure funding at. And so it's very important, that the county, maintains your credit rating over time. You have a very good credit rating. Your lease revenue bonds are currently rated AA by Standard & Poor's, which is, as you can see from the scale, is fairly high up in the investment grade. And really for lease revenue bonds, the highest possible credit rating is AA+. So you're just one notch away from that highest possible credit rating. Okay. Just a little bit of a deeper dive here with credit ratings. Again, you have an existing rating from S&P, and oftentimes we get asked, what do the rating agencies look at when coming up with our credit score? Some counties tell us, hey, we have a very low existing debt load. Shouldn't our credit rating be very high? Well, yes, that's one of the things, that's one of the buckets that go into the analysis, but it's really only 20% of the analysis, that last bucket, debt and liabilities. They do look at your local economy, the financial performance, so how the county's budget has actually performed, budget to actual over the last couple of years. They look at the amount and quality of your reserves and liquidity. So that's why having policies like reserve policies, liquidity policies is very important. They look at your management. That's a full 20%. So how again, budget related, reserves, policy driven buckets. So all of those kind of go into your credit rating analysis. And so when we do this, when we go through this process for the county, we look and see, what exactly are the key metrics that the rating agency looks at when assessing each one of these buckets. And I'm not going to go through each one of these here, but these are some of the actual ratios that S&P looks at for your economy, for your financial performance, reserves and liquidity management, and debt and liabilities. And when we go through the debt process with you, we go ahead and calculate out these ratios for you, so we're not surprised by what comes back from S&P in particular. And I'd also say that, S&P maintains your credit rating throughout the entire term that you have bonds outstanding. Because once you sell bonds into the market, there is a secondary market where investors could trade your bonds. If they want to get out of their position, they could find another investor who could buy those bonds from the folks who initially loaned you the money. And therefore, those new investors have to be basing their investment decision on the most current, financial credit rating, all that information. So even after you do a bond transaction, you have the obligation to maintain your credit rating and the obligation to keep current on your annual financial credit reports and provide credit information as you move forward. Okay. Any questions with that section before I move on? Yeah.
On the S&P criteria, the reserves and liquidity portion, how you measure the financial health of the county.
Yes.
is it fund balance of the overall county budget, or is it general fund balance?
It's general fund balance, and it is, I believe, 3 of the 5 categories of general fund balance. So
Okay.
it's like unassigned, and it's the most flexible dollars.
It's the most flexible one. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
In the delivery, once the money is delivered, is it interest bearing within our account if we have construction delays?
It
we're
is.
Paying for, and so that can be fed back into the servicing of the debt?
It can be, yes. Right, typically your construction dollars are only around for probably 12 to 16, 18 months, somewhere within that time frame. But it is interest-bearing. That money, you can actually keep those interest earnings and apply those towards either the project itself, right, for capital, or repayment of debt once your project is done.
Okay. And then one quick question maybe for you, Chair Hall, but how does the Regional Finance Authority play into this? Because the current debt is managed through the Regional Finance Authority process, and I'm not sure where they come into play with all this, if at all.
Yeah, your local debt advisory committee would be looking at the potential method of sale and potential for bond financing in context of current outstanding debt and evaluating whether there is enough liquidity available to make a sound recommendation. So you'll see that later on in the presentation.
Okay, thanks. So they would make a recommendation, and the board would make the
Correct.
decision. Thank you.
An add-on to that, and maybe it applies to the same way, but thinking about how the credit rating or our decision is affected by how many bonds we have out. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that certainly is a factor. That would be the, just going back here, that last column, debt and liabilities, your current cost for debt service and liabilities, basically that's how much debt service you have annually on a budgetary basis as a percentage of your overall budget, and they have certain buckets and criteria for that. And that second box, net direct debt per capita. So what is your outstanding total debt balance on a per person basis in your county?
That's helpful. And so, Aaron, when your team is deciding what bonds we should consider issuing, you're looking at all of that as well before you're making a recommendation.
Yeah, so the whole committee would be looking at all 5 of these criteria, our projected credit rating score based on KNN's calculations, and really looking at what is our overall debt obligation currently and what would it be if we choose to move forward and issue this new debt. We would look at that in whole and then determine, how does that affect our credit rating going forward? But more importantly, how does that affect our overall operation of the county, given that additional debt service load that we're proposing to carry? And so it is a combination of not just myself, but also your auditor, controller, your treasurer, tax collector. All of the big financial brains in the county will be getting together along with 2 of the Board of Supervisors to kind of review and vet the opportunity when it's time.
Thanks. There's been some talk about pulling the tax exempt status or lawmaking related to that. Is there an update, or could that change throughout the process?
Yes, thank you, Supervisor. There has been some chatter, rumors at the federal level about possibly removing a tax exemption as a benefit for local agencies. That concept periodically arises through time as folks try and evaluate, various revenue-raising strategies, right? Because the IRS would then be able to tax the interest on a whole new category of securities, right? In the past, there's been a fairly strong, bipartisan lobby effort, right, across the country to help preserve tax exemption. I haven't heard any update since that matter was kind of first floated. I think that there have been various, lobbying efforts to try and preserve that.
Follow on that. I know you don't have a crystal ball, so, and this is a very unpredictable administration, but generally speaking, when they talk about this, they're talking about removing the tax exemption for future municipal bonds, right? It doesn't ever become retroactive?
I mean, I would hope so, but in theory, they could remove it completely, and then the folks who loaned you money at a tax-exempt rate would then have to pay taxes on the interest that they're earning. That seems unlikely, fairly draconian, but yeah.
But in the past, it's been generally going forward.
I think that had been the
Okay.
idea that had
Okay.
been contemplated in the past.
Yep, thank you. Okay, thank you. Go ahead with your
Okay.
presentation, please. Thank you.
All right, the next section is method of sale. I touched upon this briefly. Okay, this next slide has a lot of numbers on it, but basically, this chart on the right shows your 2019 lease revenue bonds and how those bonds were priced. So unlike a home mortgage where you get one interest rate for the entire loan, what you're doing when you sell municipal bonds is you're selling individual principal amounts for each year for the entire 20-year term, and each one of those principal amounts has a different interest rate associated with it. And so the yield on the earlier maturities is lower than the yield on the longer maturities. That's like the concept of the yield curve, right? The longer that someone, like that an investor would be willing to loan you money, the more interest they would want to charge for their risk. And so you see that here in the yield column here. And so when you borrowed money back in 2019, these were the interest rates. Frankly, rates are higher in today's market. That's just the reality of the market. But we look at this concept called the true interest cost, or TIC, which is akin to that one number that you get with a home mortgage. So if you were to look at a single blended borrowing rate for your 2019 bonds, which are fixed rate, right? They're not variable rate. This is a fixed payment schedule. You were able to borrow money at 3.09% basically for 20 years. Tax exempt, fixed rate, 20 years. Okay. Method of sale. This next slide touches upon each one of those three methods that I spoke with earlier. So up top, the competitive and negotiated sale are really when you sell bonds into the public market, where you're finding end investors. That could be individual people just putting in orders. They could be your big money managers. They could be your big mutual funds that maintain municipal bond portfolios. That's the public market where you need to get a credit rating, you need to prepare a disclosure document, and you're selling bonds into the public market. Typically for smaller, maybe shorter term borrowings, we always look at the private placement market, where you could find a single commercial bank, basically like a B of A or JP Morgan or Chase, that will just buy your debt. That is typically does not require a credit rating, no official statement, no disclosure document, but they typically have, they will not loan on a 25, 30-year basis. They will loan typically more on a 10 to 15-year basis, and sometimes 20 years. So whenever we look at a potential borrowing for the county, we always kind of evaluate this, right? If you come to us with a 10-year, $7 million transaction, we'll take a very careful look at the direct purchase option because it's a little bit more straightforward. Frankly, it's less work, less cost for the county. The direct purchase market typically is a little bit higher interest rate because you have one bank that has to hold on to that loan for the entire term. So if you're borrowing money if you're borrowing more money, over a longer term, it does make more financial sense to take the public sale approach. But that's kind of the analysis that we do whenever we evaluate financing options for the county. But here's an illustration of a successful competitive sale that Sonoma County used for various energy efficiency projects, I believe, last fall. We were the municipal advisor here, and they got, a dozen bids or so through the competitive sale process. So here, Key Bank submitted the low true interest cost bid, and they were awarded the ability to underwrite the bonds. On the other hand, if we were to go through the negotiated sale business, the negotiated sale option, you would hire a broker-dealer firm earlier in the process. We would typically do an RFP to bring a firm on board, and then on the day of sale, we would actively negotiate the actual pricing for every maturity based upon the investor interest and all. So we're always on your side to try and push down the interest rates as much as possible, but we kind of look at the investor subscription levels, the tone of the market, and all. So, yeah. Any questions about the methods of sale? Okay. Post-issuance practices. Yeah, as I briefly touched upon, once you sell bonds, there is some continual maintenance of the debt program throughout the course of the repayment period. When you borrow money, you sign what's called a continuing disclosure certificate, where you commit to basically upload your ACFR plus certain tables that are in the disclosure document on an annual basis in order to keep, again, the investors current on your financial condition. Arbitrage rebate, since the IRS, again, this is a preferential treatment, right, that you're able to borrow money on a tax-exempt basis. Any positive arbitrage, so if you have money that's, let's say, in a reserve fund or various other funds that are earning above the rate that you borrowed at, you have to rebate or pay back the difference to the IRS. So if you're able to earn at least what you're borrowing at, you can always keep that amount. Again, I touched on this IRS spend down requirements, basically spending 85% of the total amount within 3 years, and really committing to not have any private use at the facilities that are benefiting from tax-exempt municipal bond proceeds. And the folks up in Sacramento, CDAC, they have certain reporting requirements on an annual basis as well to make sure that you're actually spending your money and paying down your bonds. Okay. Yeah, just this page, just because it's so important, that continuing disclosure requirement is not only the annual report, but if any one of these laundry lists under number 2 occur, you must basically immediately, or within 10 business days, report that to the market. So if there's any changes to your credit rating, if there's any bankruptcy or payment default, obviously stuff that is very urgent that an investor, a current bondholder would want to know. There is a 10 business day time limit for that. Okay. All right.
I have a question on the on slide 27. Can you go back?
Yes.
So it did mention, so ensure compliance with public use limitations throughout life of bond. So that's any facility that's built with the use of a municipal tax exempt bond is for public use only. That makes sense.
Yeah.
We typically have nonprofits sometimes do the work or run the facilities or participate? I'm assuming that's not an issue, it's just private use, and how strict is that? Like, I mean, I'm thinking of a facility where somebody wants to sell snacks at an event.
So there is a de minimis allowance for that. I think it's like 5 or 10% of the proceeds could be allocated for what's known as bad use. So like if you have a coffee shop, right, in your lobby, that usually has a small enough footprint where that would be okay. But this is why you have a bond and tax counsel, typically on call, to ask these kinds of questions. And really, if you're contemplating selling any facilities that had the benefit of bond proceeds, we should have a conversation about that. And certainly, if you are leasing out space to private entities, we should have a conversation about that with staff and council as well. So.
Yeah, I'm not in a minute. Okay, and so that similarly, if, the economy is very unstable right now, if we go into a bond and we start to build something and prices just go through the roof and we decide maybe that's not enough money to finish it, what are our options then?
Yeah, so that would be a difficult situation, right? You would have borrowed. So typically we wait until you have a construction contract in place that's usually pretty firm with the cost. So you have a firm number, and then we right-size the borrowing to that number. Mm-hmm. If for some reason unexpected circumstances occur, you could borrow more money. You could use cash on hand to complete the project. It would be difficult to unwind the bond transaction, especially if you sell it into the public market, if you wanted to get out of the bonds, per se.
Okay, yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm sure this question is coming up other places as the tariffs bounce up and down and building materials are rising and supplies are beginning to drop. So, okay, thanks. Go ahead.
Similar question, but if you got a grant in lieu of a fund, if you got a grant to pay for part of the capital expansion, mm-hmm. and you did not draw that down, how would the excess funds be handled? You borrow 100 million, you get a grant for 20, and then you're 20 over. What happens?
Yeah, if you knew that the likelihood of that 20 million coming in was very high, we could structure in a call option for that $100 million, where you could apply that 20 million very quickly to just pay down principal. Mm-hmm. Usually, when you issue a long-term bond, there's a call option where the county could pay off with no penalty bonds, but only after year 10. So there's usually 10 years of call protection. But if we knew that there was a high likelihood of money coming in, I don't know, a year or two after, we could structure in a portion of the bonds with that can be paid mm-hmm. off very quickly. So you wouldn't be paying interest off,
Okay, makes sense. And then one more quick question. Mm-hmm. For example, if we built a facility that was charging Medi-Cal billing rates, for example, we were making money. We built it, completed it, the bond is moving forward, but we're making money on that. Is there any problems there?
Yeah, so some of your peers have financed like healthcare and hospital facilities, and part of the diligence process, again, that bond and tax counsel do when you're like right up front, is they look at doctors' contracts. They look at all of the contracts to see if there is private use, and if that bad use allowance could absorb that. The rules around private use and the permissibility are very complex. Unfortunately, frankly, I'm not an expert on it, but that would be part of the diligence process that we would go through before borrowing the money. Yeah.
And just to add, Supervisor Bullock, I think the making a profit, right? It's still public money that would still be required to be used in a public purpose. And so there's that nuance too, versus leasing out a portion of a building to a private doctor practice or a private business practice. That would be the different scenario where you would be in danger of losing your tax exempt status. But to the extent that your building that you financed is still for public benefit, that's the test.
Okay. This next section very briefly touches upon the county's outstanding debt profile, and we work with staff to make sure that this information is current. The transactions here, we've just listed the larger transactions. The county has several additional smaller loans that are shorter term, but we take into consideration when looking at your debt load all of these transactions. So here we show your 2019 lease revenue bonds. That was a public sale, 20-year maturity, AA rating. That call provision, optional call provision, is in 2029. So as we're approaching that, we will look and see if it makes financial sense to refinance that, depending on the interest rate environment there. And you have a couple of direct purchase transactions, your new clean renewable energy bonds. I think that's the solar array out here. And those were done actually through a direct purchase. So you've utilized kind of both methods of sale in the recent past. Okay. Okay, so what do rates look like in today's market? I mentioned that 6 years ago you were able to borrow money at basically 3% for 20 years. If you were to look and see, what would a 20-year borrowing rate look like in today's market? You're looking at about 4.38%, so quite a bit higher. And these scenarios here aren't targeting any specific project fund amount. We basically said, hey, if we were to, if budgetarily wise, we wanted to spend $1 million per fiscal year on debt service, how much project would that generate? Right? So you could imagine the longer you borrow money for, the more money you could squeeze out of that $1 million per year. And you see that here, right? 20-year scenario, you were able to borrow under that project fund line about $13 million. That increases to 14.5 in the 25-year scenario and a 15.6 in the 30-year scenario. But then, of course, your borrowing rate increases as you go up through as you borrow rate for longer periods of time, 4.38% for 20 years, 4.61% for 25 years, and 4.75% for 30 years. So we're really in a different rate environment. The market has been very volatile, as I'm sure folks are very familiar with, especially over the course of the last months, when the reality of the tariffs really has kind of shocked the markets. But transactions are being done. Both on a competitive and negotiated basis. So the bond market is functioning. We're just at a different rate level.
And I want to point out here that when we work with KNN on a specific project or set of projects, we can do a number of different things that change this particular scenario slide. So I asked Bobby to do this with an average annual payment of about $1 million flat for the whole term. We could flip it and say, I want $30 million in my project fund. And he would redo these numbers and tell us what the debt service would be over each of those time periods as well. And conversely, we prefer in government a flat, stable payment because that's a lot easier for budgeting. But there are options to have staggered payments that fluctuate. So if we were going to guesstimate, for example, that our ability to pay debt service was going to increase over time, we could structure a bond such that the payments also increased over time. Of course, the risk is that your revenue doesn't increase. So that's why we tend to do a flat annual debt service amount. But just to show you the flexibility here, if we're constrained by how much we can pay in debt service, this is one method. And if we're constrained by how much we need to do the project in the time in which we need to do it, then this debt service number would change.
Okay. Okay, this last section, just a very brief market update, kind of enforcing what I just said. This here is a chart of the bond buyer 20 bond index, and it's really a 20-year interest rate since the start of the millennium, I guess, 24, 25 years here. And as you can see, you know, all the way on the far right, we're in a rate environment now that's just significantly higher than we have been for quite some time. And really, this looks like a line that's just shot up really over the course of the last month. And I just list a couple of the factors here that impact borrowing rates, like, you know, inflation expectations, economic conditions. I should add, yeah, tax policy changes, and certain policy decisions coming out of the federal government as well. There's been a lot of scrutiny and attention paid on the Fed funds rate recently. Right now, you know, the Federal Open Markets Committee, which sets this rate, increased the rate drastically over the course of the last couple of years in an effort to fight inflation. And the big question is, well, why aren't they reducing rates now that inflation is more under control? And you could see here, there's actually a futures market for where the market thinks that the Fed funds rate will be over time. So folks think that the Fed funds rate will actually decrease on a 1, 2, 3, 4 times over the course of the remaining calendar year. Whether or not that actually happens, you know, is subject to you know, economic releases, data. There was a fairly strong jobs report that was just released this morning that suggests, you know, the strength of the economy has been fairly resilient. So there may not need to be a need to actually lower this if the economy is not struggling. But this chart changes on an hourly basis and has been very volatile over the course of the last couple months as well, as you might imagine. Okay, let's see. Yeah, and that's all we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We may come back with questions after Aaron. Yeah.
Yep, I would expect so. So appreciate, Bobby, your Financing 101 session. Now I'm going to try to put some context to what Bobby was talking about. So a quick review of project readiness. These slides, again, will look familiar from your January workshop. These are the top projects that are still in play that will likely need general fund assistance, either in the form of cash, money, or financing debt. So the animal shelter is near and dear to all of our hearts. We have a conceptual design. We are in conversation with some partners with the cities for their relative willingness and ability to help us finance the project. We are working on that financing plan, and then we'll be able to complete construction documents at some point later this year and put the project out to bid once that financing plan is solidified. So one example of a project, the Sheriff's Office firearms range, most of you are aware it did have a federal earmark that did not make it through the budget debacle of 2024. It is back, it's submitted for an earmark for 2025-26, and we are really hopeful that that goes through and comes back to us as a possibility to help fund this firearms range. The CEO's office is very supportive of this project because it would save us costs when it comes to training obligations. Our deputies are currently traveling very far away to be able to qualify for a firearms rating. So having an indoor, in-county facility would be advantageous to us all. And so we're working with the Sheriff's Office on how to fund this portion of their training facility. It's a bit of a smaller project. 15 million was our initial estimate. It's currently out for design build project to refine that number and also refine the design and see if we can either get that price down a little bit or be confident in it so that when we do figure out the financing plan, we're sure of the amount of money that's needed. The correctional facility has a remodel and a medical expansion. Both of those projects are in play right now. We had a feasibility study done 5 years ago that identified what was needed to renovate and maintain that facility. And over the last 5 years, we've added on a need for medical expansion. And so some of that project has changed, and it would warrant additional development review in collaboration with the Sheriff's Office facilities and the CEO team. This is a $30 million project as a guess, just by its magnitude, and also that correctional facilities tend to be more expensive than others due to their security requirements. And so we would look to formulate and kind of finalize the concept and project scope over the next year for this one. The Summit Maintenance Storage Facility is one that kind of came up on our radar not too long ago. The need for some storage for our equipment up on the summit that's used for snow removal, but also roads maintenance, and not having to travel that far up with our equipment would be ideal. We do have some storage currently up in that area, but we don't own it. It is privately owned and we lease it, and so there is some risk that that may at some point go away. And so really kind of I need to identify either a location or the build of a structure that could store our equipment is the project here. And then finally, the Sheriff's Office renovation of the former juvenile hall into a dispatch training facility is also in play. This is a longer-term project because it's not as critical, but does meet a need that's been identified by the Sheriff's Office, and looking at about $8 million in cost at this point. So again, in development stages, opportunity to refine the scope and also identify some potential funding braiding opportunities here. And so also in January, I talked about the different options that we have for capital project financing. Capital project general fund assignment does exist for this reason. It tends to be rather small in nature and used for those maintenance projects because they tend to be a couple $1 million or a couple $100,000 rather than multiple millions of dollars. We do have some other county funds available to dedicate towards capital projects, most namely the Sheriff's Special Revenue Funds, which they're tying to their firearms range and also training facility. We have tax-exempt bond financing, which you just heard all about in the last hour as a strong contender here. And then also some public-private partnership contribution opportunities with the animal shelter and with some of the other facilities that we're looking at. There's always opportunity, I think, for a partnership scenario. And then, of course, grant awards and federal earmarks. We aggressively go after these funds. Back to the timing consideration, a lot of times those grant opportunities and even earmarks really require solid plans, solid scope, solid amounts, solid timing. And so the more that we can spend getting those details solidified, the better position we're in to be competitive. So in terms of our county's financial status, our general fund balance, wanted to bring this slide back as well. We're looking at our adopted fiscal year budget of $40 million in total general fund balance. We're estimating the year end to be about 45.1, and then this is a preview of the 25-26 budget proposal. We're looking at about $41.5 million in fund balance. A notable change here is that I'm proposing to move some unassigned fund balance into facilities planning assignment, specifically to increase the readiness capacity and also specifically to offer the opportunity to pay cash for some of these smaller projects that we're looking at needing to be completed. So that will be part of the deep dive that your budget subcommittee was going into starting next Monday, and will be further discussion as we move along the process. Our preliminary general fund for 25-26, about $100 million in revenue. We are looking at a $3.6 million planned use of fund balance. This is largely and almost exclusively your ARPA dollars that were committed to either projects or for staffing. If you recall, your Economic Development and Recreation Board objectives were seeded with ARPA funding. We're still spending that seed money down, and so that's that planned use of fund balance. That gives you a total of 104.2 proposed revenue. And look at that, our proposed expenditures come in exactly at that amount, leaving us with no change to fund balance, which means we don't have extra money in 25-26 to throw to debt service, right? So if we were to go out to bond market now and issue debt immediately, we wouldn't have even that $1 million in Bobby's example to be able to spend on debt service, all things considered, right? There's obviously room for movement within these numbers, but this just illustrates the financial picture that this county is in right now, where our discretionary revenue that goes to our general fund that would be used to back financing is very flat. And yet our expenditures are not, and they do continue to go up. And in fact, we didn't start out balanced. We had to ask departments to reduce their requests for general fund dollars leading into 25-26. And so what the subcommittee is going to dive into over the next 2 weeks is how did those departments come at that request for reduction? Some of them weren't able to make it. Some of them made some concessions, and others were able to meet the target. So it is a little bit over the map. And it really comes back to the policy direction of the board and where you want to prioritize spending of your discretionary revenues. Currently, it's pledged towards staffing and programs. You have this capital project opportunity before you, and so seeking direction from you both today and in the future as we move towards budget adoption, where you want to program those dollars will be important. Like I said, debt service capacity, it's going to be challenging. It's not impossible. Nothing's impossible. It's just going to require some robust discussion and some tough choices. And so unknown state and federal budget impacts, those will continue to fluctuate and be unknown for the next several months. And yet we still need to invest in county facilities. And so striking that balance and figuring out where the opportunities are and are we ready when those opportunities come will be important going forward. As far as recommended next steps, over the next 2 months in May or June, we're going to have budget subcommittee meetings. Your chair and vice chair are going to take a deep dive into the larger budget, not just the general fund, $100 million, but also all of the other funds. We have a public hearing for that proposed budget on June 10th, and then we have budget adoption scheduled for later in June. Between June and December, I'm recommending that we continue this design and development process for not only the 4 projects that I highlighted today, but all of the projects to really make sure that we're making the most use of our time. We are being strategic and being able to plan accordingly for those buckets of deferred maintenance, for department requests, and for ADA required projects. We will do this through the capital projects ad hoc. That committee meets regularly to review projects as they are ready for supervisor input. And then looking ahead to October, December, I would love to review the county's fiscal position at that time when we have current year-end numbers, when we know a little bit more about the state's budget proposal, when we know a little bit more, hopefully, about the federal budget going into 26. And that's the time at which I propose that the Debt Financing Advisory Committee would convene and really look at what are the opportunities here, what are the risks, and how are we feeling overall about going forward and issuing debt to achieve some of these larger projects. And so all of that would culminate back at your January board workshop with a more specific planned proposal for all 5 of you to kind of weigh in on and ask your questions of. Rather than the high level that we've been giving you the last couple months, it would be more specific to this is our planned proposal. But again, these are my recommended steps, and I'm happy to answer questions that you might have and or take direction at this time. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, very helpful. Remind me, going back to the beginning slides, for example, the deferred maintenance, that big chunk of funds, that we're planning to fund on an annual basis.
We do chip away at deferred maintenance on an annual basis, yes.
Okay, and so we're not going to be looking for bond funds for that. That's not part of just the ones that you propose are the ones we're looking at right now.
I would say deferred maintenance offers an opportunity for us. If we are going for a bigger bond issue and we throw $3 million in there for some deferred maintenance projects that it would take us 5 years normally to fund. Mm-hmm. But if we could just do it right then and there, it's a low cost option to bundle it. And that's where KNN earns their money, because we're able to say, what if we did this, and what if we did this, and what if we did this? And they say, yes, that will work, or I don't know that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. But I want to highlight the opportunity is there. We fund deferred maintenance on a cash basis. So as much money as we're able to sock away into that special assignment, it takes a while to build up to enough money to re-roof several county buildings, for example.
Right. What about, and I'm not trying to come out of left field here, but just thinking about, and I like that you're talking about looking at in October. That makes a lot more sense given everything. The projects, so our veg management projects that are now stalled and may not have the funding ever restored, is that something we could look at funding through a bond as well? Or are there restrictions on the type of?
Vegetation management is not considered capital, right? Capital is one time, build the thing, done, pay over time.
Yeah.
Veg management is an ongoing obligation with routine maintenance that's going to be continuous. So it's
Right.
not something I would recommend for debt financing.
There's no way to redefine that. Okay. Questions?
I guess, to your point, the budget subcommittee could move could move money around, right, into that, and then move it out of deferred maintenance, carry bond expense for the deferred maintenance portion. That's always possible.
Yep.
Understanding the fund balance is something I take special interest in. I just had a quick question just on the timing. So if I understand you right, the budget for 25, 26, we're not going to actually have debt service. We don't anticipate carrying any debt load until 26, 27 budget year.
Correct.
Okay. I just wasn't sure.
We're not
the
planning
entire
to
timing.
issue debt in this proposed budget.
Yep, thanks.
And if we were to move forward next year, we'd have to define that, for example, 1 million a year debt financing, we'd have to define that early on as part of the budget process.
Right, so we'd have to look at what level of debt service are we comfortable with adding to our operational budget for the next 20 to 30 years? And what does that look like in terms of impacts to our operations, all things considered? So that's why the timing is pretty critical, because you want enough information about where your revenues might land to see how much did they grow, and then also our expense obligations, salaries, benefits, retirement, general liability, cost plan. These are the things that kind of we struggled with this year. Because our revenues were fairly flat, we weren't able to navigate those as well as we have in years past. That could absolutely change. And so being able to watch our revenues on a quarterly basis, report back how we are relative to our budget proposal or our projections will be important for us to just be paying more close attention to, because we have this identified need that we're working towards. But yes, it may require some consideration for, project elimination or program resizing, reprioritization of funds in order to afford that debt service.
Okay. And guys, jump in if you have questions. I have one more. What's that? Oh, let me finish this one, and then I'll make sure I go back to you. Sorry. So I'm questioning a little bit. It sounded like you were recommending to continue forward with sort of design and potential permitting, but basically mostly design. And so we're going to be putting money into these projects, looking at the designs and getting them ready in case we go out for a bond next year. That could be considerable amount of money. Have you thought about putting some of them on hold until we know more what's going on in October?
Yeah, I think there's opportunity for staff to spend some time going through that development, making sure the scope is where we want it to be before we incur external costs with an architect or engineering firm. At that point, we would want to identify, a budget and a funding source to move it forward in the pre-development stage. And that would be, a project that we're fairly confident either has to go forward or we absolutely want it to go forward, that the timing of it becomes more of a priority and more critical at that point that you're outlaying cash. But also, we don't want to stop moving forward, right? These issues aren't going to go away. These needs are not going to magically disappear. And so we don't necessarily want to be caught flat-footed where we're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and then all of a sudden it's here and we're not ready. So managing that sweet spot, again, in coordination with your capital facilities project team through your ad hoc, through my office and the treasurer, tax collector, auditor, controller, like all of us kind of routinely talking about these projects. I'm new, right? I'm my year in, but this is my idea is the more we communicate and we're on the same page and we're all going forward towards the same goal, the better we're going to be positioned and be able to kind of grasp the opportunities that come at us, whether that be a grant, an earmark, or some savings in our operations that was unanticipated or unexpected, where we're going to propose to the board, hey, do you want to spend this new money on debt? Do you have higher priorities that we need to be aware of?
And that's something that will come up somewhat in our budget committee in the
Right.
next 2 weeks as well. Okay. Okay. Any other questions on the board?
Just kind of observation. So we're not anticipating then increased revenues through property tax or TOT or sales tax moving forward in this current budget year?
We are anticipating increases. They're just not great increases, right? They're not significant enough to counterbalance the increases that we have in expenditures, in payroll costs and benefit costs and contract costs.
And then is there a scenario where we don't realize any increases in all three of those things moving forward this year, just based on, what we're hearing worldwide, especially with our sales tax? So both retail sales and tourism are projected to be very down this year. So are we taking that into consideration as we're looking? Do we have a contingency plan for that, those losses?
We do have a bit of a contingency plan. I will say it's not dialed out completely. We will see increases in property tax because of Prop 13. What we won't see is the sales of property, and that bump in supplemental property tax will be what we see decrease, and also the level in which property tax increases hit because you don't have that turnover, you don't have that revaluation as we have in the past during times of real estate boom. We are accounting for that. Sales tax is a much smaller part of our discretionary revenue, but we are projecting that it is pretty flat, meaning the growth is maybe 2 or 4%, versus in the past it's been 6 to 8. So we are looking at those trends and adjusting accordingly. I would say if the bottom falls out of the economy and we run into a situation where our revenues are completely not where we want them to be, that's why we have fund balance. That's exactly why we have those fund balance assignments for general purpose, for contingency, for economic uncertainty. And we would have an opportunity to come to the board and say, this is what we're seeing not come in. Our recommendation is that we tap into fund balance. Or our recommendation is that we stop certain projects that are draining that source of funding, right? There's a whole bunch of, a menu of options. And depending on the situation and the scenario, we would be evaluating all of those options and then coming to the board with a recommendation.
No, I don't really have any questions. I think that when we look at this and where our future is going, I mean, we're looking at conservatively where we're going to go, but we have to keep projects in the hoot because if we do have something that comes up, I think you have to be ready. You have to be physically ready to make those moves. So, yeah. I mean, I know we're all in trying little times right now, but I think that you guys stay on top of it pretty well. It was really interesting, Bobby, your numbers and how that works. It's sometimes it's like a little bit much when you're just taking it all in for the moment. But I mean, I know we've done it. We've done very well over the years with our capital improvement projects. We've done very well with our bonds, and we've paid them off. We've been conservative in how that works, and I think that's going to continue because that's what we do here. I mean, that's one of our core priorities is fiscal responsibility, and I think that that's where we're headed. And I think we have to be able to open those doors when we're ready, and we have to keep them closed when we're not. So it was a good eye-opener. So appreciate this workshop. I think it really was a benefit to all of us.
Thank you for that. It was very informative. In your experience, so I know, excuse me, we had, you had that graph that showed that the expectation is that rates are going to go down in the next year, let's say it's a percentage point, which obviously is going to be a significant savings in borrowing. same time, construction costs may be going up, and so there's always that tension and that balance as far as timing. So my question is, and we can talk more later as well, other municipalities, other counties, how do they navigate that balance between wanting to go forward because of these needs, the often uncertain interest rate environment and construction costs? Is it accurate to say that right now is particularly uncertain, or are there other counties, and I know their situations are different, that are pulling the trigger? But in general, the timing, I mean, it seems like, like with the stock market, if you try and market time, you're always going to lose pretty much. Do you envision it getting more certain and better, and let's say a 2-year period? Are other counties or municipalities pulling the trigger now? And how do you kind of, in a nutshell, navigate that? Because it's always going to be that tension between rates and, I guess, needs.
That's a good question, Supervisor. I'm assuming that's addressed to me. I would say that, right, there are some counties that are fairly far along in the process. So if you had a construction bid out and you just received bids and you're basically kind of more committed to a project, then I'd say those folks are more committed to borrowing the money to do the project. We are seeing, budgetary stress up and down the state, right? That is not unique. And the uncertainty from the federal government and volatility, I would say, has encouraged folks to generally try and wait out the volatility, right? And I'd say, in particular, about a month ago, the bond market, along with the equity market, were especially volatile, right? A lot of that has calmed down, and just within the last week, we saw some fairly robust competitive sales. We saw a lot of supply in the bond market. So again, I think the period of high volatility related to the imposition of the first round of tariffs is probably behind us. But obviously, as the market reacts to new information, it could be injected with new volatility. So I think that folks who are fairly committed to a project are just moving forward and borrowing the money. We help try and identify if there's a particularly bad day in the market, we will tell you, don't price your bonds today, give it a week, right? If you have the flexibility, it's not a, yeah, it's a, yeah. So that's part of our role too, is to try and judge from a market perspective when would be a good time to borrow the money.
And I would just add, from the construction side, when we go out to bid, there have been scenarios where the bids have come back and they're significantly higher than anticipated or significantly higher than we have funds available, and we have opted to not move forward at that time. In that scenario, had we issued bonds and then gone out to bid, we still have time. We don't have to be concerned that the bonds are going to expire because we have 3 years to draw them down. And so in that scenario, we could choose to reject all bids, wait 3 to 6 months, go back out to bid and see if they're better. And if they weren't, then we'd reevaluate the whole thing. But chances are good that we would have better bids if we were able to wait out that volatility. So in that scenario, it still works, right? Yeah.
Yes, our example of that. So, I mean, that was a considerable savings.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm going to open it up to public comment. You're it.
Michael Taylor, District 1. There we go. I just saw green light. Michael Taylor, District 1. I was going to comment along the lines where Lisa was coming with her statements and point out that if I understood the budget last year, the 24-25 budget, last year, a year ago in May, the county was already seeing sales tax property taxes, TOT, all of the normal incomes for the county that are not dependent on state or federal funding or grants was going the other direction. Also, it appeared to me, if I remember reading it correctly, there was projections that it was going to continue to go the wrong direction for the next 2 fiscal years. So I guess I'm saying before Donald Trump was elected, we were already heading in the wrong direction. And there was a pattern that was going to continue to head in the wrong direction. And I think borrowing money now to borrow ourselves out of this doesn't make sense. And listening to the presentation, it does make sense to come back and look at it in 6 months where those borrowing costs could come down, inflation could come down, and there's more stability in the market. So my recommendation is understand what you guys already predicted for the next 2 years, and it looks like we're heading that way anyhow, and kick the can down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to close public comment, bring it back to the board. Allison, do you have questions? Seems like this is a good opportunity as well for you.
No, I think it was a really important presentation for the board to hear, to look at priority projects, to get a pulse of where our budget is at. I think the next few weeks, budget subcommittee and coming in with a balanced budget to the board, I think we could continue this discussion when at the budget adoption and public hearings in July. And we'll continue to monitor stay focused on monitoring the situation, leaning on experts, monitoring what our counterparts are doing, throughout the state, and then work through the ad hoc committee process with the Board of Supervisors to define next steps.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Just a couple pieces to one of the comments. The indicators, I think, or at least because I was on budget subcommittee, the indicators did show that there was changes in transfer and permit pulls, so that was like a flag. But when do the actuals come out, and when do we get the actual assumption to match with the indicators that were discussed in public comment?
So we'll get the property tax roll from the assessor usually in July after the budget's adopted.
Yeah, so just one note, the indicators that we use and the graphs we use to project revenue is not exactly the same as revenue. And in my opinion, I've seen a lot of indicators, hey, it's going the wrong way. And then what we get is actually great or good. So just a point to note there. And then the one piece for me too is we've talked a little bit about the capital facilities plan. And, I had the benefit of being on cap facilities last year and sitting through a lot of meetings where we talk about projects. There's a lot of detail missing from here. And when we talk about borrowing money, I think, and to your point, you've given us a great overview. So I'm not saying that it should be included in this presentation, but I think when we talk about borrowing large sums of money, I'd like to understand, or I think the board should understand in great detail the projects behind all of that, not necessarily just the gross kind of overview of big project allocation. So I don't know. I've heard changes maybe in the way that cap facilities is presented to the board or how that transparency is kind of conveyed in the process. But I just, as one board member, think that during times like this would be great to talk about cap facilities maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, the intention is definitely to provide more detail in terms of specific projects, specific dollar amounts, as well as timing when we're talking about a financing plan, right? We're going to have that level of detail. And we should also be making you aware of what isn't moving forward as a result of what we're proposing to move forward, right? So that nuance of this is what we heard prioritization from the board, this is how we're able to make it work, this is what we're not able to make work right now, here's the plan for that. So there still is, like I said at the beginning, those projects, that $90 million doesn't go away, it just changes. It goes up and down, they change budget buckets, and the timing and priority. I think looking at it holistically, again, it's an opportunity cost. We're able to lump things together where normally they would be on their own trajectories, independent of one another. Financing gives us that ability to look at and consolidate smaller projects into bigger ones. And I will add on the revenue piece, we have been doing analysis lately of how well we've been budgeting our revenues in terms of our budget to actual ratio. And in the general fund discretionary revenue in particular, we're pretty spot on. We have a fluctuation of 1% to 3% over the last 10 years. And so from a revenue perspective, we've gotten really good at being able to project and predict using those indicators. I will say on the expense side, we have further analysis to make because we always have that vacancy factor, and then we always have planned expenditures that for a variety of reasons don't move forward. And so diving into those nuanced details takes a little bit more time, but we definitely are, in times of struggle like we are right now, we want to make sure that we are as dialed in as possible so that we're not necessarily leaving money on the table, and we're also not overcommitting or oversubscribing what we plan on doing. So that's where that balanced budget proposal comes into play as a conservative, prudent opportunity for us to say we're living within our means. We're not overextending ourselves. And in times where we are overextending ourselves, it's a planned use of fund balance. There's a specific project or reason behind it, and the board is fully aware of it. So that level of transparency is what we're striving for.
Okay, thank you. I think just one other smallish comment from my point of view. I do think this board has been pretty consistently relatively conservative, wanting to be very careful with our funds, and I imagine that's going to continue. I think we're all in alignment on that. The one thing I quibble with is there will be no earmarks this year, and I do not think we should be counting on them. I would prefer to see an analysis that shows no earmarks. There isn't even a process in Congress right now for them to ask for them. So I would prefer that we just assume there's none, and then somebody can say, I told you so if I'm wrong, and then we have some funds to work with. But it's a similar sort of approach, I think, in terms of being conservative. That doesn't look like there's going to be any possibility of that.
We could certainly move that earmark to the contingent financing plan, right, instead of the primary financing plan.
I think that would make more sense.
And in Bobby's example, where all of a sudden we got the $20 million, we're able to navigate that.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me. I want to thank you for your presentation. It was very clear. It's a lot of detail and a lot to take in, but it was really, I think, well done. I appreciate it so much. It gives us a lot more tools to bring to the budget decision table. And Aaron, thanks for your always great explanations, answers to our questions. So thank you so much for the presentation.